Hello, impressive souls, and welcome to a new episode of Live Your Impressivity Show. My name is Alex Badita, and I'm your host. And today we're talking about a very important topic, self-care. When it comes to journaling for self-care, the most important thing to remember is that you are doing it for yourself, but also for the people around you, because you will show up with a lot more energy. When I thought about this topic, the first person that came to my mind was Mary Allison Brown. Mary Allison is a licensed mental health therapist and consultant, author, speaker, and certified compassion fatigue professional. She's on a mission to redefine self-care, and she names it so beautifully as mental health hygiene. We're going to talk in this episode about her 5 pillars program and how important each of these are for your self-care. Through her courses and offers, Mary Allison teaches her clients how to create sustainable self-care routines. And this is really important, especially if you are busy and you are taking care of so many other things and people in your life. So if you think that you need to bring a lot more self-care in your life, then keep listening. Mary Allison is the author of the 5-star rated guided journal, Align with Joy, a 30-day guided joy journal designed to help you cultivate a life filled with joy and gratitude. She's also a featured author in the international bestseller Mastering Your Inner Game, Moving Mountains with Mindset. There are so many awesome nuggets that you're going to get from this episode, so keep listening and take notes. And now let's meet Mary Allison. Hello, Mary Allison. So good to see you again.
Yes, it's so good to see you. Thank you so much for having me. As you know, this is my favorite thing to talk about, so I'm so excited to get to talk to you and to your audience today about journaling, self-care, all of the things.
Absolutely. It's such a pleasure. And I just wanted to mention that we met, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. Now with the pandemic, everything is distorted.
I think it was 2019.
Yes. And we met in Santa Barbara in an event where we were both speaking, the Soul Success Summit, and we connected and we talked throughout this time. We had that beautiful group mastermind. It's so awesome to continue to be in touch with you and to see all the great things and the amazing things that you've been doing. I want to start with your definition of self-care. What does it mean for you? And tell us more about your mission to redefine self-care.
That's actually a perfect place to start, because when I was thinking about how we would talk about journaling, I think that if we're talking about journaling for self-care, we have to start with how we define self-care. And I like to say that I'm on a mission to redefine self-care as mental health hygiene. So as you know, but your audience doesn't know yet, I'm a mental health therapist. I am actually a trauma specialist, and I work with a lot of people who have experienced childhood trauma who come to me as adults. They haven't quite healed from it, dealt with it yet, so they're ready to heal from these things that happened years ago. And I always start with self-care. I have a framework I use called the 5 pillars of foundational self-care. And I start there because as we get into deeper therapeutic work and as we sort of dig things up from the past, a lot of times that work can be really destabilizing. And through my work over the years, what I've learned is that most people have no idea how to take care of themselves. So people come in, and they say, I'd like to really take a look at this childhood trauma or these past events or whatever it is. And I say, okay, great. In order to do that, we need a stable foundation. So tell me how you take care of yourself. And most people sort of stare at me with this blank expression and they're like, I don't know. I don't know how to do that. I don't know what that would even look like. And so I start there because the way that we take care of ourselves through our daily habits truly has such a huge impact on our mental health. And so it really is mental health hygiene. And when, we think about our physical health and our hygiene practices, I like to use the analogy of brushing our teeth. We brush our teeth twice a day, hopefully at least. We don't just go to the dentist once a year and say, make it better. Right? But with mental health, that seems to be what happens, is that people neglect those small, minuscule daily habits that make such a big difference over time when we're consistent with them. And so I like to define self-care as mental health hygiene. What are those things that you're doing every single day that are supportive of mental health? And then the other piece of defining self-care for me is I have an actual definition that I go from. So big picture, it's mental health hygiene. And then my definition of self-care that I like to use is that self-care means identifying how you want to feel and prioritizing the things that make you feel that way. And again, that comes back to our daily habits and the consistent small things that we're doing every day. So that's how I define it. And that's always my starting place really for all of this work.
That's really great. And I think the term that you use, mental health hygiene, that's really, really brilliant. And you also mentioned 5 pillars in your foundational work. So could you tell us a little bit more about the 5 pillars?
Yes, and actually journaling fits very nicely into one of the pillars. So the 5 pillars are really basic. None of this will be a big shock to anybody, but sleep, of course, the way that we sleep, how well we sleep, if we're getting enough quality sleep really impacts mental health and emotional functioning. So sleep, nutrition, and I always like to say I'm not a nutritionist. I actually did a great podcast interview with Allison about this one. She's brilliant in this area. But from my perspective, what we know is that what we eat directly impacts mood, stability, and mental health. And so are you eating in a way that supports you in feeling good? That's all I'm looking for in this nutrition pillar. I'm not here to analyze anyone's diet, but I like to follow the 80-20 rule. Does 80% of what you eat make you feel good, energized versus, the other 20%? And then the next pillar is movement. So I specifically don't use the word exercise here, although the research does show that 30 minutes of intense exercise 3 times a week for many people can be as effective as antidepressant medication. We know across the board that exercise improves mood. It's the one thing consistently in every study that we know, because of the endorphins, because we can move the stress hormones through our bodies, improves mood. And I have many clients for whom exercise feels really inaccessible. And so this is just about movement. This is just about connecting with your body in whatever way feels good, nurturing, supportive to you. And that looks different for everybody. So movement might just be, 5 minutes of stretching on your yoga mat, or it might be going for a 7-minute walk around the block. It doesn't have to be, training for a marathon or something. As you know, and as we'll talk about with journaling, there's so much wisdom in our body, and we're so good at ignoring it until it becomes impossible to ignore, which is never a good situation when, we let things get to that point with shutting down our inner wisdom and our intuition. So, okay, so just the first 3 pillars are those sort of basic things: sleep, nutrition, movement. And then we have reflection, which is where journaling really fits in. And reflection is about intention and how are you living your life on purpose and with intention. And so I think journaling absolutely is my favorite thing in that category. I think that journaling is hands down the most powerful tool that we all have available to us in our personal development, personal growth arsenal. And that said, I have clients who just are resistant to journaling for whatever reason, don't like it, won't do it. So other things fit into the reflection category as well, like visualization or affirmations, I am statements, sort of anything that is about being intentional with how you're spending your time. And then the final category is mindfulness. And in the 5 pillars framework, mindfulness is really about not necessarily a formal mindfulness practice, but mindfulness is really about activation of our parasympathetic nervous system, which is our body's relaxation, calming response, because we know that everybody is chronically stressed out. And so our stress response system is activated constantly throughout the day, all day long, every single day. So the mindfulness pillar is really about how are we intentionally activating our body's calming response. And we can do that through a formal mindfulness practice or meditation practice, but we can also do that through just really intentional deep breathing. Deep breathing is one of those things that people dislike a lot because it's not really a quick fix in any way. And what I recommend to my clients is that we pick, 2 times to start, maybe like one time after we wake up and one time before we go to bed, where we just on purpose for 2 minutes use some type of a deep breathing technique, whether that's square breathing or paced breathing are two of my favorites, but there's so many. And so by doing that, we're not making some massive leap of improvement in that moment, right? But it's the consistency of building that habit over time. And when we're activating our calming response to counteract the stress response, over time, those results become much more powerful. It's something I tell people that, disclaimer all of the time. This is not a quick fix. It's not going to magically change your life, with one deep breath. But it's so important to build those habits. And then when you need those skills, you have them there.
So we have sleep, nutrition, movement, reflection, and mindfulness. And what I really like about them is that it correlates with something that we were sharing in a previous episode with another guest, with Christine Bergsma, about the trifecta, or the triangle with body, mind, and soul. So these are basically addressing all of these parts as well. The whole system, it's a holistic approach. You have sleep, nutrition, exercise for your body, you have reflection for your mind, and then you have mindfulness to really go deeper into your inner soul and really calm down your system.
Yes, I talk about exercise or movement depending on my client every single day that I see therapy clients. And I think for some people that probably feels a little weird, right? Like, I'm here for mental health and I want to talk about these things. Why do you keep telling me to go on a walk? Right? But we need a way to complete the stress cycle, to reduce anxiety, to reduce depression symptoms, to improve mood. And exercise does that. So they're also interrelated. We can't focus on physical health, mental health, or spiritual health without the other ones. They all go together, and it's so important to have that holistic approach.
Very true, and 100% agree. People shouldn't wait until there are big red flags in their life, or when their body starts to give them health problems. But what would be the signs that people who are listening and haven't taken into consideration self-care, what are the signs that they could look for and realize, oh, actually, maybe I should be more careful with this and include some practices into my daily routine?
So one of the things that I have available for people as a resource for that is a free challenge around sustainable self-care. Because what I think is that it's actually helpful to go through the 5 pillars and take a look at them. How am I doing in each of these areas? And what would bump that number up just one, right? So if we were rating it on a scale of 1 to 10, if I were to rate my reflection pillar at a 0, because I just know I'm not doing it, what would take it up to a 1? We're never trying to go instantly in one leap from a 0 to a 10, from where we are to where we want to be, because that's not sustainable. And so something that's so important to me when I talk about self-care is redefining it. There is not a one size fits all. You're not going to find self-care on a checklist. You have to learn to tune into yourself and to tune into your body and ask yourself what you need and learn how to meet those needs. And that's why journaling is so powerful, honestly, because so many people really don't know, right? Our thoughts are sort of all tangled up and we don't really know what we need or how we feel until we put pen to paper and can work through those things there. So in order for it to be effective and in order for you to be able to maintain a routine, it has to be sustainable. So small, consistent daily actions over big changes. I always ask new clients, how much time can you commit to this? And pretty common for people to say what they think they're supposed to say, right? And say like, I could probably do 30 minutes a day. And I'm like, okay, cool. Could we start with 5? Really, like, I don't want people starting with a big commitment, because what I've seen happen so frequently is that they think that they should, right? It's coming from this place of obligation or guilt that they haven't been doing it in the past. And then they pick this bigger number, 30 minutes a day. Every day I'm going to commit to this. And they're going from 0. And so inevitably, after a few days, after that initial burst of motivation, they fall off. And then they get caught up in this whole negative self-talk cycle where, of course, I couldn't do it. I can't do anything. I can't finish anything I start. I'm such a failure. None of that is helpful. And so a big piece of it for me also is the conversation around self-compassion and what that looks like. And self-compassion in anybody's self-care journey is about asking yourself, what do I need in this moment? And then doing your best to meet that need. And recognizing that sometimes the things that come up for us, the things that we need, aren't available or accessible to us. And so then that requires digging deeper. How can I meet that need in a different way? During the pandemic, the thing that kept coming up for me very strongly was, I need to know when my kids go back to school. But I couldn't know because nobody knew. That information wasn't available. And so as, I could dig deeper in that and like, okay, well, so why do I need that? Like, what will that do for me? And I realized that what I needed was that sense of predictability. I needed to know what to expect so that I could make my plans. And when I realized that what I truly needed at a deeper level was like structure and predictability, then I could build that into my life in different ways, right? So maybe I can't have that thing that feels really great right now, but I can create structure and consistency in a schedule to meet my own need for predictability. Ultimately, that self-compassion of knowing what we need, doing our best to meet that need, and also acknowledging for many of your listeners, if they're anything like my clients, one of the things that comes up is that there's guilt around meeting our own needs, around having our own needs. And that is unhelpful. And I can relate. I experience it as well sometimes. And what I would say, if people are feeling guilty about having their own needs or feeling selfish for meeting their own needs, is that meeting your own needs and believing that your own needs are important is not selfish. And it doesn't mean that you think your needs are more important than everybody else's. They're just equally as important. Every one of us has emotional needs, and that's not something that should be a source of shame, although it often is for people. So really moving through that and journaling on it, right, can help you find clarity around where that comes from, why that might be, and how to shift that.
Wow, so many golden nuggets, and we have so much to unpack here because honestly, there are already a few things that came to mind when you were sharing this. So let's go first to talking about people who are really busy. I think this is very common, especially nowadays. And now that we're coming out of lockdown, pandemic, we kind of tend to go back into that busy routine. And I hear this as well with people that I interact with, that they say, I don't have time to think about myself. And the tendency is to put other people's needs first and saying, well, I'm so busy, I really don't have time. So what would be a way to create a self-care routine for busy people? How would that look like? How often or how could they schedule it in?
Yeah, that's really important because time is the most common reason that people cite that they don't take care of themselves. And so you mentioned earlier, doing these things before our body physically sick, before we start to develop physical symptoms. And that's what I was talking about when I say, our inner wisdom is so powerful and it's always talking to us. And when we ignore it, it finds ways to not be ignored, right? Through physical symptoms. And that's really common. So I would say, it sounds like a cliche and it sort of is, and I'm going to give actual more practical strategies. But what comes up for me is the whole idea of, if you don't make the time now, if you don't make time for your wellness, then you'll have to make time for your sickness, right? Like you have to nurture yourself. And it's so difficult for so many people. So when it comes to practical strategies for how we fit it in when we don't have the time, and I very much relate to this. So I don't claim that it's easy. I'm not minimizing how difficult it can be when you have work and a partner and kids and all of the things that need you to take care of them. So one thing that I would suggest is, first of all, shrinking the change. We're not going from 0 to 2 hours a day, right? That's not realistic. I really think that it's very realistic and reasonable and a great start to do both the mindfulness and the reflection pillar in easily under 10 minutes. I mean, you could do it in 5, right? If you do 2 minutes of deep breathing, and then 3 minutes of gratitude journaling every day and build that habit, great. If that's still too much, I love the concept of habit stacking, which is linking a habit to an existing habit. So one of the first things I'll ask is, where are you potentially spending time on low value activities, right? Scrolling Facebook. Social media has its place. It can be really important. And there are times, right, when it is. But there's also times when we're just scrolling. And so I was like, how many minutes a day do you spend scrolling Facebook? Do you spend 15 minutes a day on Facebook? And if you do, is it reasonable to reduce that to 10? Can you, when you wake up in the morning, stay in bed 2 minutes longer, or just while you're laying there anyways, can you take those deep breaths and think the gratitudes in your head? If you don't want to get up, if you don't want to journal, okay, but can you focus on gratitude in your head? And gratitude's another thing that feels kind of fluffy to some people, but there's so much science around the power of an intentional gratitude practice. One of the studies that I've read studied a specific intervention called 3 good things, which is literally as simple as it sounds, literally writing down 3 good things at the end of the day over time, right? And in this group that they studied, 6 months later, even with not continuing the practice of writing down the 3 things after the initial length of time that the study was, which was, I think, 3 months, 6 months later, they still had a 30% reduction in symptoms of depression. Just from that exercise, there's so much evidence around gratitude practice. And so I share that with my clients. We all have a lens and a filter through which we see the world. And what we choose to focus our energy and our attention on, our brain looks for more of that. And so when we focus our energy and attention on what we're grateful for, we are naturally priming our brain to look for more things to be grateful for. So it shifts mood. And so there is, a lot of science around that. You literally, if you can't do it any other time while you're brushing your teeth, can you think the gratitudes in your head? It's simple shifts like that make it work for people. And there's lots of different ways to track it. In the self-care challenge that I mentioned, I have some different tracking sheets because different things work for different people. And the biggest thing, from my perspective, when it comes to self-care that I want people to take away is that there is no cookie cutter approach. There is no one size fits all. I can't give you a schedule. You have to make your sustainable plan for your life because it's your life that you live every day and you know what's going to work and what's not going to work.
Did you know that self-care is crucial for your business as well? When you take care of yourself as an entrepreneur, you show up with more confidence, you make better decisions, and you find better solutions. Journaling for self-care is also part of the Business Journaling Studio, where entrepreneurs come together and they find resources for their business and for taking care of their mindset and everything else that has to do with becoming better performing in your business. The Journaling Studio is a platform where entrepreneurs just like you go to get guided questions and support from a like-minded community and use business journaling as a tool for developing both personally and professionally. Check out the Journaling Studio and transform your life and business, because when you take care of yourself first, you will show up better and more confident in your business, and your customers will also feel more taken care of. So if you don't make time for your wellness, you will have to make time for your sickness. I think this is really crucial to remember and to bring that to mind every time when people just find this excuse of not having time, because then you will have to make time. As you said.
Yeah, and the other piece that comes up, I'm actually drinking from my mug right now that says self-care is an act of service.
Yes.
When I talk to moms in particular, they feel like they can't make time for self-care because their kids need them. And one of the ways that we work to reframe that is, who do your children deserve to have as a parent? Who do you want them to have? And what do you need to be that version of yourself? Because I truly believe that when I take better care of myself, I'm a better partner, I'm a better parent, I'm a better therapist, I'm a better friend, right? And so if my children are the reason why I can't take care of myself, then I have to remind myself that taking care of myself also benefits them. And I think a lot of times, while I wish that women in particular, could just believe like, well, I should take care of myself because I deserve to feel good, that is a bigger hurdle to get over for many people. But when we can see how taking time for ourselves benefits the people that we love most, usually that can be a helpful way for people to start to wrap their mind around it.
That's very true. And I think that's also very helpful to reframe what it means because, as you said, yes, very many people have this idea that it's selfish to take care of yourself rather than actually seeing it as an act of service, which is really beautiful. And I think that's a really great reminder. You mentioned tracking, and I wanted to ask you, can people set goals when it comes to self-care routine and self-care practices? And how can they actually track it? I know you mentioned that you have some tracking sheets. Can they do it in a journal? How would that look like?
Yes. So I would say, again, whatever way works best for them. But one of the things that I found really particularly helpful at the very beginning of the pandemic, when everything first shut down, we sort of stopped doing all of our things, and we had these routines, right? We go to this exercise class this many times a week, and then we go to yoga this many times a week, and all of those things became unavailable to us. So we sort of just stopped. Like they were gone, right? We didn't have access to those things. What I realized fairly quickly was that my accountability to my health didn't involve anybody else, right? I was accountable to myself. And so I started redefining what self-accountability looked like in my life. And so the first way that I tracked it, and this has gone through many evolutions since, but what I found really helpful was just I made a list of all the habits that felt supportive to my mental health. So all the 5 pillars, and then some other things that I didn't want to do, like eating sugar, right? This was just my way of tracking it. And then every day I would like mark off which things I had done. And I kept it on my fridge so that at the end of the week I would see like, am I doing more healthy things for my body or unhealthy things? What's my balance looking like? And for me, just having a simple like yes or no without an expectation to do all the things every day helped me to see it and to visualize what I was doing for myself. I absolutely think you can have goals. And I think just the key from my perspective, from a mental health perspective, with having goals around self-care is goals with self-compassion. So I might say, I want to, right now, I'm training for a triathlon. So I have my schedule laid out for the entire month, right? But what if I don't do my workout tomorrow? How am I going to respond to that? And it's not about making excuses. It's about what if my body is telling me, or what if life happens, because it does. How do I respond to that? And what do I make that mean? Because the meaning that we make of things is subjective. And so I would say, yes, goals are important, and know yourself and know what feels motivating to you, and don't allow yourself to beat yourself up if life happens, because that's just never helpful. And so, encouraging people to practice self-compassion, finding the most compassionate perspective of their own behavior, not to make excuses, but to treat ourselves like we would treat a friend. And then what do we need to do to get back on track? And that it's okay. So that's what I would say about goals. Track it in a way. I think tracking in a journal is great. I was doing that a couple months ago. One way that I started tracking was just tracking my daily steps and if I had gluten, because I was trying to avoid it and that was hard for me. So just like simple things, right? But what feels good to you and what feels effective to you and what's motivating to you, and not getting stuck in something if it's no longer working is also important.
I think this is a really good difference that you're bringing between finding excuses and actually understanding when you need that space to allow yourself to skip something if something comes up, or without feeling that guilt. And I know that you mentioned that guilt is one of the biggest things that happens. So how can we overcome it when that happens? Because I have that as well. Like if I have a very busy period of time in my work, and if I have so many things to do, but then I feel the need to rest, I feel guilty when I take the time to rest, and I'm aware of it, but I'm sure that very many people go through this same process as well. So how can we overcome that guilt?
So I think one of it is reframing what it means to you. So you talked about feeling guilty for resting. So what does rest mean to you? And there's a model that I use with my clients. It comes out of trauma therapy treatment, and it actually applies to everything. So I use it all the time. It's called the EMI model. And if you just picture, E is the event. The event is what happened. What happened is objective. It's fact. Nobody could argue about it, right? This thing happened. The M is for meaning. So the event happens and then the meaning happens. The meaning is always subjective. We create the meaning. We don't always know that we create the meaning, but we create the meaning, which means that the meaning can be changed. The important piece of this is that the meaning is what impacts our lives. So if you have a belief system that tells you that rest is lazy, rest is for the weak. You've been like inundated with messages of like hustle culture and I'll sleep when I die, right? Then what does rest mean to you? And then is that absolutely true at all times, in all circumstances, in all settings? Of course not, right? And there's actually in my journaling course, one of the prompts which I can share with you is journaling for anxiety, which is a modified cognitive restructuring process, which comes from cognitive behavioral therapy. And using that, we can shift our belief system, which is the meaning. And so using that process is so important, really analyzing like, what am I making this mean? So pre-pandemic life, one of my favorite hobbies was flying trapeze. Expensive, it's far away, it's totally just for fun. Like it's an activity that can induce some guilt because like, why am I spending my time and my money this way? And what worked for me to reframe that was like, I cannot stop smiling when I go to flying trapeze. Like I am like a child. Like I'm so excited. I am lit up. And when I leave, I take that energy to my work. So what I redefined for
Yes.
myself was that taking this time to just play is an investment in my productivity because then I'm more creative, I'm more energized. I am going to my work with this energy and not feeling like I'm just dragging myself through the motions, right? And so I think a lot of times with guilt, it's that question of what is bringing up this guilt, right? And what are you making that mean? And the guilt in particular with moms, right, is so strong. Like I should be giving this time to my kids. And so if there's any moms listening, the way that I reframe that is that you want your children, I'm assuming, to have quality time with you, right? If you have 2 hours to spend with your kids and you take 30 minutes of that even to invest in yourself and in your own well-being, then you can be fully present for that next hour and a half with them, which is so much better than being with them for 2 hours and being resentful that you didn't get your own needs met. I always think of it like, is like the old woman who lived in the shoe nursery rhyme and like all the kids are just pulling on her skirt. And I always think about like, I have a partner and I have pets and I have kids and they're all pulling on my skirt and I have work and so many different projects going on and they're pulling on my skirt. But my emotional needs are also pulling on my skirt. And so when I can meet my own needs first, then that's one less distraction when I'm spending time with the people that I love. And that to me is so important because I feel like I can actually be present with them. And so that was a lot of things. And reframing guilt really depends on where the guilt is coming from and what we're making it mean.
So this is really super valuable, and I just want to sum up the exercises that you shared with us. So the one with EMI, so you said event, meaning, and
Impact. So
Okay.
impact, yeah, and impact is just the recognition that the event is not necessarily what impacts your life, it's the meaning that you make from it. So when we talk
Mm,
about trauma, which is where this comes from, trauma is subjective, right? So you and I could experience the same traumatic event and then experience our emotional response completely differently. And that has to do with meaning. And that's what I'm saying, when I say that, like, the meaning is not always, it's not always like we're like, oh, consciously, I'm deciding that this event means this. It's not like that. And that's why it requires digging, which is why journaling is so helpful. Like, wait, what am I making this mean? And so when you can kind of have that awareness around the meaning, you can start to shift it. And like with self care, like I said before, it's not common to go from where we are to where we want to be in one leap. So it might not be like, well, this event that I thought meant this, I'm going to give it this entirely new meaning. Sometimes it's just looking at what are the other possibilities. I've decided that taking time for myself is selfish. I've given it that meaning. But what else could possibly be true? And when we can see the possibilities, we can start to open up a bit more to seeing things differently.
That makes so much sense. And I think that's a really beautiful way of reframing guilt and really seeing self-care without guilt. I mean, I'm sure that guilt will always show up. There's always going to be shame around this, especially when we have that belief system coming from childhood, from what we hear, from what the messages that we're surrounded with. So there will be guilt coming up, but I think it's important, as you mentioned, just to be aware and to see the meaning behind it and to understand it.
Yes, and totally important for people to know that it will keep coming up, right? Like, we're humans. This is not a one and done experience where, like, oh, I feel better about this guilt and now and always for the rest of time, right? It will keep coming up. But when you work on these skills, you get better at the skills, which means that you can reframe the guilt and move through it more quickly. And that's the goal. It's not that, like, you'll never experience it again. Like, this is a human experience, but what do you do with it when you experience it? And you can get much better at that.
How does it look like from a journaling perspective, for instance? Because you were also mentioning that negative self-talk is part of how we manifest that guilt and how we kind of prevent ourselves, we block ourselves from taking care of ourselves and all of these practices. How can we use journaling? And maybe if you have some prompts that you can share with us.
I have one that I really want to share with you. And then that actually brings up a whole nother prompt that I haven't prepared to share, but I'm going to share that one with you as well. So first, I want to share with you my favorite 3-part journaling prompt. If people don't journal at all and they don't know where to begin, I think this is a really good one because this prompt is really designed to cultivate self-awareness and self-compassion. And so, like I said, earlier, a lot of people that I work with, I say, what do you like to do? How do you take care of yourself? And they just don't know anymore, right? They've almost lost touch with that part of themselves. And so this 3-part journaling prompt is so simple. It's how do I feel? How do I feel in this moment? And when I do it, I am like, I'm sad because blah, 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 blah. I'm angry because of this. Like, I just let all of my emotions kind of come out onto the page. The next step is, what do I need? And in that, like, no limits, no boundaries, what do you need if you could have anything? And sometimes things come up there that, like I mentioned earlier, might not be accessible. And so step 3 for this prompt is, how do I proactively meet that need? What can I do to nurture and take care of myself? With my clients, I often talk about this idea of you have to be a nurturing parent to yourself. And so what would the most loving, nurturing parent do for you in this moment? If you're feeling sad, like, what do you need? Do you need some chicken soup? Do you need to just snuggle up on the couch? Do you need to go on a walk? Right? Like, what do you need? And so people always say they don't know. But if you take time to sit with yourself and listen, you do. And I think what's hard for people is admitting what they know. And so something that I also say all of the time, and I feel like is so important for people to hear, is, can you allow yourself to know what you know? And can you give yourself permission to admit what you know? The other prompt for what you asked for when it comes to negative self-talk, this is a prompt specifically around forgiveness. So if we're experiencing, guilt, or we're mad at ourselves for doing or not doing something, this is a really useful prompt for those moments. So the first one of this is, looking at that event that happened, the thing that you're mad at yourself for. So it's a different way to look at the meaning component. The first question is, what is the lesson? So what did I learn from this? I can't take credit for this quote because one of my clients actually said it, but it was so good. I have it written down on a sticky note. Take the lesson, let go of the shame. So then the next step is affirmation. So what is the lesson? And then the affirmation piece is, how can you affirm yourself for the choice that you made in that moment? So if I, for example, didn't meet my goal today because I didn't go on a run, how can I validate that and affirm that decision for myself? Right. So again, not from a making excuses perspective, but from a compassionate perspective. You've been training really hard and your knee's been bothering you, and it is okay to take a day of rest when your body tells you that's what it needs. Right. Like, so you're just affirming the decision. What is the most compassionate perspective you can find here? And it can be really helpful to people to think about somebody else, because we're typically much more compassionate to others than we are to ourselves. And so, if the person you love most had made this decision or had done this thing that you're so angry at yourself for, what would you say to them? What would that look like? And really thinking through that can be helpful, because we're so hard on ourselves, right? And all I want is for everybody, I mean, this is a big goal, everybody to really learn how to treat themselves like a best friend, how to nurture ourselves, how to care for ourselves, because we all deserve that experience of being loved and cared for and nurtured.
So many good prompts, so many of them. I took notes, and I think
So
these
many.
are really, really valuable, and especially for people who are just starting out with journaling, because, the simple act of taking a few minutes to reflect and tune in and listen to what are your needs, how do you feel, and how you can take care of that need that you have in that moment. I think it's a beautiful practice because, as you said, very many people are not aware of that, and they say, well, I don't know. Like, I don't know what it is. And then, it just comes up as something that they're resistant to, and they just don't want to acknowledge it, but they definitely know what it is.
Yeah, so many people have been taught and conditioned that emotions are unsafe. And so when we start to ask about more vulnerable emotions, that doesn't feel safe to a lot of people. And so, can you do that safely in your journal? Can you admit it to yourself? Can you admit your truth to yourself? Right. And even getting more comfortable with that process is so valuable.
I think this is, again, the best thing to remind everyone that it is a process. So don't expect things to just shift overnight, and, just give yourself permission, as Mary Allison was sharing, give yourself permission to actually go through this process and make small shifts through this entire time. I really love everything that you shared with us, and I could literally just ask you so many more questions, but I want to go to journal that you have out there, which is Align with Joy.
Yeah.
And I really, really love it. And I have it, I've used it. And it's such a beautiful practice for 30 days to actually get into this habit of journaling and listening to exactly this, what you need and how you take care of yourself. So I would like to know, how does Mary Allison take care of herself? How does your self-care practice look like? You already shared with us a few tips and a few things that you have done in the past few months, but how does your daily routine look like?
Yeah. So I'm definitely a journaler, and I would say I aspire to have a daily practice, but that's not just real life for me right now, and that's okay. My sort of daily routine, my favorite is when I can get up and have quiet time by myself to have my coffee, journal, and read. Like, I love that first thing in the morning, just quiet space to do that. And that happens, I would say, probably like 3 to 4 times a week, that realistically happens first thing in the morning. I have made it a goal, like non-negotiable goal, to get at least 10,000 steps a day, so that even if it's not a workout day for me, or even if I'm not doing something else, that's a really attainable goal. And so I focus on that. And that's become very easy now. Like, it's become habit, which is nice. Once something becomes habit, we don't have to spend so much mental energy trying to make it happen anymore. And exercise, like I said, we're training for a triathlon. So really having a structured routine around that has been helpful. And then the other things I kind of do at random. So what I have found is that with the season of life that I'm in right now and the ages that my kids are, having like a morning 30-minute meditation time, like maybe I have in the past, it just hasn't happened. And so, compassion around that. But I do meditate sometimes and I do practice the deep breathing things sometimes. I would say those things are not as much of a schedule as they could be. And I also am really good about doing other things that I need, which, includes like massage and Reiki and the sauna and just whatever it is in that week or that moment. But yeah, journaling definitely fits in several times a week. I use the prompt that I shared with you, the 3-part prompt, very frequently. I use gratitude journaling frequently. A lot of people don't know where to start with journaling. And so even for me, like if I'm like, oh, I'm feeling something and I need to do this, I come back to those prompts, and there's absolutely no shame in using prompts. I've used guided journals at different points, and that's why I created Align with Joy, because so many people don't know where to start with journaling. And so having those prompts and really having just like tiny bit of time to dedicate can be so helpful.
That's really awesome. And I think the best way is, as you said, to give yourself permission and to be compassionate when things don't happen as you would have a schedule. And, there are stages in life, and there are things that happen and that we need to take care of. And, it's okay. It's okay. I think this is where that part of releasing guilt and really the way that we speak to ourselves comes into play.
Yeah, and being realistic, right? So part of what we're doing right now is we got our 2 youngest kids to agree to do the shortest version of the triathlon. And so they're training with us. And I don't want to train with them because I clearly run and bike faster than they do. But we're doing their training with them. So that becomes a family activity. So it is self-care, but it's a family activity. And then I'm also very lucky to have a partner who is so supportive of self-care, and we do such a good job of supporting that space for each other. So yesterday we ran with our kids, and then I, said, I also need to go to the gym today and I need to do some weights. And so he took the kids. And so I know that that's not everybody's truth. And I feel very lucky. I'm very blessed to have that support, but you find ways to incorporate people and to make it work, and not at anybody's expense.
That's really awesome. And I think there are so many beautiful ideas, so many beautiful shares that you had for us today. And I just wanted to say thank you. And before we wrap up, I have 3 questions that I address to all of my guests. Just wanted to first acknowledge you for everything that you do in your space of mental health and redefining self-care. And I think it's such a beautiful mission. And I'm super excited to see how it evolves over time. And I know that the people that you have as clients are already transformed and they are benefiting so much from your work. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
What are you grateful for?
I mean, I'm getting married in 2 weeks, as you know, so I'm feeling like in a love bubble about that. But I'm really grateful, like I just said, for my supportive partner. We also live in like the most beautiful neighborhood, and we get to walk down to the water and see the seals every single day. And I feel really grateful for that. And I feel really grateful to get to do this work and to really get to encourage people and hopefully inspire people and hopefully help people practice more self-compassion, hopefully every day.
How do you impress yourself?
Man, how do I impress myself? I don't have a good concise answer. I am really passionate about what I do. And I think one of the ways that I'll say that I impress myself is that I'm not afraid of a challenge. So I'm currently working on a whole new, the development of a whole new brand. And that's very exciting and a little bit daunting, but I feel proud of myself for diving in and sort of doing the things. And I don't want to say anything more about that yet, but you'll see soon.
That sounds very exciting. I'm looking forward to it. And the last one, what is your definition for living your impressivity?
Ooh, for living it, I think my definition of living my impressivity is doing my very best every single day to live a life that aligns with my truth and my values and what I believe. And so to have that congruence between what I believe and what I think and what I say and what I do. And that to me, when we can live our lives as close to our truth as possible and as authentically as possible, that to me is really impressive, because the world is sort of always telling us to be someone else or to look different or to do something different or to silence our own needs. And so stepping up and honoring our own needs and living our truth, I think, is so incredibly powerful. And I absolutely love when I see other people doing that. And I think that's my definition as well.
That's so beautiful. Thank you so much, Mary Allison. It was such a pleasure.
Yes, it's so fun. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Live Your Impressivity Show. And don't forget to connect with Mary Allison Brown, check out her courses, her programs, and everything that she's doing. And don't forget to get your journaling skills upgraded with day-to-day practice. This is what it means when you want to see results. You need to put in the work and actually get down into business, because journaling for self-care is all about being very intentional and doing this practice for yourself and then showing up with more confidence for others. If you liked this episode, don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform, leave us a review, and let me know if there is some other topic that you would like to know more about. And until next week, stay impressive.